Hey everybody, welcome to Jam Daddy Whiskey. I'm Dan, and tonight we are going to be trying a bourbon that's released yearly as a limited edition from Lux Row Distillers. It's usually finished, and this year's no exception. We are talking about Blood Oath Pact 8. There it is. Blood Oath is a limited edition put out yearly by Lux Row Distillers, and it's blended by a guy named John Rempe, I believe is how it's pronounced, Rempe. And the sticker, the gimmick with Blood Oath is that we're never going to know exactly where the whiskey was sourced from or what the mash bills are. All we know about this one is that it's a blend of 3 different whiskeys. Let's see, where does it say in here? A 14-year-old high rye bourbon, an 11-year-old high rye bourbon, and an 8-year-old, I believe, also a high rye bourbon, but that one is finished in Calvados casks. So, what is Calvados? Calvados is a type of brandy made in France, specifically in Normandy, France, which is the region in the northwest of France. It's where the Allies landed on D-Day. Calvados is made from apples or pears, or apples and pears. It's usually made from apples, or at least primarily an apple base. The mash from the apples and pears is turned into a cider, and it's that cider that is then distilled. After the cider is distilled, it's aged for at least 2 years before it can be called and sold as Calvados. So we're basically looking at a blend of 8, 11, and 14-year-old bourbon that has a brandy finish on the label. The ABV on this is 49.3%, which brings the proof to 98.6. I believe Blood Oath always does that with each one of their pacts, their yearly releases, as another part of their little shtick. You know, as corny as some of that stuff may be, Blood Oath making a pact to, never tell the secret, and this being the 8th pact, the packaging on this is actually pretty cool. But, how's the bourbon? Let's find out. Let's see what we get on the nose. I almost get like a cream soda on the first note. Then there are hits of rye in there too that spike a little bit. They're not too strong, but they're definitely there. A little bit of some green notes on there, like maybe there's a tiny bit of youth, but that might be the Calvados, I'm not sure. The rye is really coming through on the nose in a kind of a fresh way. And the more I smell it, the more I'm picking up on a bit of the brandy, which is kind of like this clean but sweet smell. And combined with the rye, I think it works really well because I am getting some of those rye spikes to kind of interrupt the sweetness and well, if it makes sense to say that a note is creamy, this one kind of feels like it. I'm just picking up on that cream soda kind of note. Or maybe like a root beer float, actually. It's like a Barks root beer, but the really intense kind of bite or spike from the Barks, like it's calmed down with a bit of vanilla or something. So yeah, root beer float with maybe on like apple pie. It's a really amazing nose. I like it a lot. Let's go in for a taste. So it starts off feeling viscous on the front palate, then kind of thins out as it gets toward the back. I'm picking up more ethanol than I remember on this one usually as it comes toward the back. Might be because it's the first time I've had a drink in a while. So let's see what the second sip brings. On the front palate, I'm surprised to get 3 main things. It's oak, which was a little surprising, brandy, and rye. Not rye like you would from a rye whiskey, but the rye notes that are really present in this bourbon, which end up being more like brown sugar and baking spices. Like if you had an apple pie crust that had a lot of allspice or clove or something like that in, some of those really punchy baking spices, something like that. The things you might put in like a mulled wine. And the brandy, it sweetens it, and it's more like it kind of balances out the natural sweetness from the bourbon and keeps the rye from taking over, I think. So it acts almost as like this middleman that kind of softens everything. But the back palate again, it's like all rye on the back palate and the finish. That's really what takes over, is those rye notes in the bourbon. And it hits a little harder than I would expect for a 98.6 proof, which is a little surprising to me. A little bit of like an orange marmalade note. I can't really tell if the Calvados in this was apple or pear, or maybe both. I'm not getting really strong appley flavor notes, and pear is something that's always a little bit softer in my opinion, especially when it's kind of added in. You're not getting like a solely pear brandy or something like that. And so the Calvados cask I think really does soften this up from being a total caramel brown sugar rye spice bomb into something that's more complex, almost crushable, really easy to drink, and creamy. I've had this a few times to try to wrap my head around it and to really solidify my opinion, which I think speaks to, you know, how complex maybe it could be, that there's a lot going on. The three notes that always stick to me that I keep picking up every time I have this are mainly the rye spice and the Calvados influence on this one, but then also some oak. I think the oak really takes a back seat to those other two. It doesn't really stand out as much, but I think that might be where a lot of the vanilla is coming from. And you can pick up on the finish a little bit of astringency. It's not too drying though. It's pretty nice. It's more like it's just a little bit of that bite that I think comes on the back palate, and the finish is coming maybe from the oak. So what score do we give this? I think this is really a delicious whiskey. Every time I have this, I like it a little bit better than the previous time. I think that's probably a combination of, you know, more air getting to the bottle, maybe some more alcohol evaporating just a little bit to change it a bit, but also just the fact that there's more to kind of tear apart in this whiskey to work through, and that it's just a solid blend of some decently aged bourbon. 8-year bourbon's fine, but 11 and 14-year-old bourbon, that's pretty good. Those are tough to find. So the grade that I would give Blood Oath Pact 8, probably an 8.4 tonight, which, to be fair, is higher than the grade I would have given it the past few times I had it. So this was a really good night for it, but I think it's fair to say it probably could range from like an 8.1 to an 8.4. I do really like it. It's really easy to drink. For coming in at under 100 proof, you still get a good amount of that Kentucky hug. You really feel it, especially in the back. But onto the overall grade for this release. So taking into account how good the whiskey is, but then also how hard it is to find, how expensive it is, packaging, the overall experience of drinking the thing. And this is where it gets a little bit more complicated for me, because it is great whiskey, and I believe it's going to be easier to find now. I've been noticing it's a lot easier to find in my area. It seems to be hitting a lot of store shelves in what seems to be like the 4th or 5th wave of doing so. And I've heard since then, I can't really confirm this, other than with the anecdotal evidence of me seeing it everywhere now, that it's not allocated anymore, which is kind of weird since it's a yearly limited release. So I don't know if we're going to be seeing more of this for every year's release of Blood Oath, but I guess time will tell. The problem though is this is not a cheap bourbon, not by any means. I think the cheapest you could reasonably expect to find Blood Oath is like $120 or $130 before tax. I think I paid a little bit more than that. And that's a lot of money for a bourbon that's under 100 proof. It makes sense if Rempe and Lux Row are sourcing this older bourbon. And I should say, this is Kentucky straight bourbon. So everywhere that the bourbon's being sourced from is from a Kentucky distillery. This isn't MGP or Dickel or anything like that. So we've got Kentucky bourbon that's aged decently, and then that's finished in a cask from a specific type of brandy imported from France. You can imagine why that's going to be a little bit more expensive. But doesn't mean that it's going to be worth it for you to spend that sort of money on this type of whiskey just because it was more expensive to produce. So if I'm factoring all that stuff in, I think the grade that I would give Blood Oath Pact 8 is probably an even B. Again, that's assuming that it's going to be easier to find. If it goes back to being really hard to find, like the previous packs, 7 and 6, well, probably less than that, probably like a B minus, C plus, something like that. We'll see. If you have a different opinion on this, if you pick up on different notes, if you hate the Calvados, if you're not picking up on the rye, let us know. If you've had a harder time finding Blood Oath than I seem to be having now, or you have an inside scoop on whether it's actually going to be allocated or not, let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching, everyone. Hope you enjoyed it. And until next time, cheers.